What would Karen's jet be if Carrick had not burned? Ponder that.
Homeworld 3 is the most recent addition to the cult classic Homeworld franchise. Released in 2024, this game was met with all-around terrible reviews from fans, and is currently sitting on mostly negative reviews on Steam. But is it really that bad? As someone who's played every Homeworld game, I thought I might as well give my thoughts on this game and the wider franchise. So for today, we'll analyse this game's gameplay and story, and I'll give my view on whether it deserves the negativity, or whether there's something of value here. We'll start off pondering gameplay, as that's where I think this game really does shine, if any part of this game could shine. Gameplay is a rather simple affair. If you've played a Homeworld game, this game will be pretty similar, if not identical to those ones. You have one form of resource, RU, which you gather using resource ships or your primary mothership, and then you turn that RU into units. Unfortunately, there are no other forms of resources in this game, or really anything in this game, which is rather disappointing. For example, in Deserts of Karak, there were artifacts that you could find in levels that would give you permanent buffs and things like that. Unfortunately, this game has none of that in its main campaign, though it does have artifacts in the War Games mode. It definitely feels like they didn't do much with the basic mechanics from this game to differentiate them from the other Homeworlds or expand them in any way in that regard. There are quite a lot of ships in this game. Again, unfortunately, there isn't really anything new or unique compared to previous Homeworlds. You have your basic strike craft, which are small ships like interceptors and fleet bombers. Then you have corvettes, where you only have one ship, the railgun corvette. At least that's for the primary factions, the Higaran. The opposing faction, the Incarnate, has 4 different kinds of corvette, but you don't get to play with them in the campaign, and so it might feel rather strange that you only have one corvette, and with a whole corvette section. Frigates is where we actually get a lot of different kinds of units. We have ion frigates, which are good against hitting long-range targets. We have support frigates, which can heal nearby ships. We have suppression and assault frigates, which are good against strike crafts. We had the torpedo frigate, which is arguably my favourite unit in the game as a long-range artillery. As long as you have something spot for it, they can often shoot things from miles away. And that's how I like playing my games, killing things from miles away without getting close. Then finally, for frigates, we have the mine-laying frigate, which can lay mines, which will of course explode on the enemy if they get close. Then we have capital ships, the carrier, destroyer and battlecruiser. The carrier isn't really a fighting vessel, but it can produce units from itself, making it a sort of mini mothership. I did hear in the initial versions of this game that destroyers and battlecruisers were rather weak and easy to kill. I think that's a problem that's been rectified in these final likely version of the game. They're actually quite strong, maybe even a little too strong, which would make sense if they were weak in the beginning, and developers may have overcompensated in improving their effectiveness. Unless you have dedicated units to deal with them, like the torpedo ships, it does feel like defeating destroyers and battle cruisers without their equivalent units is rather difficult, or at least that's what I experienced playing through the campaign on hard. There were definitely a few levels where I lost nearly my entire fleet, taking out wave after wave of destroyers. Finally, we have platform units. These are essentially your static defense. You have anti-strike fast strike craft turrets and heavy torpedo turrets for capital ships. Then you have the humble probe, who can just scout. He has a long range of sight, so he's good as a scouting unit. I often made use of these together with my torpedo ships. I had this probe spot the enemy from a long way away, and then the torpedo ships blow them away. Then, of course, we have resource collectors, which once again can capture ships, although I did hear that in the initial version of this game, capturing was too powerful and unable to prevent largely in the campaign, so it was easy to capture large amounts of ships. I think, again, they've overcompensated here, because I only managed to capture one ship in the whole campaign, and it was very difficult and cost me many resource collectors. So it seems a little more difficult now in this version. But I could just be bad at the game, potentially. Again, I was playing on hard. There are a few things that were in previous titles that aren't here, which I find a little strange. For example, capital ships no longer have subsystems, which was one of my favourite parts of the previous Homeworlds, where you could upgrade capital ships by giving them certain departments on the ship, which could be used for things. For example, you could have fire control towers, which increase the damage of not just the ship, but other ships around it, which made capital ships quite important in Homeworld 2 because they could buff the weaker, smaller ships around them. That's gone, unfortunately, in this game. Also, unit veterancy, which we had in Cataclysm and Deserts of Karak, is gone, and I don't know why. It would be easy to, well, maybe not easy, but it'd be interesting to have units actually level up and gain experience, as always in games. And it's rather disappointing that a new battle cruiser that you create is exactly the same as a veteran one, which has killed hundreds of enemies. There's no discernible difference between them, which is, as I said, disappointing, and it's strange because it existed in the last game, Deserts of Karak. Another thing they removed was the idea of you gaining all of the resources in a map once you finish in the campaign levels. Now, instead, you have to manually go around and gather everything. And I'm not sure why they changed this. It felt like a good quality of life improvement in Homeworld 2, where if you fully cleared a level and you were free to jump at any point, you would just auto-gather the resources. I understand it made levels a little easier, but it seems like an easy fix. Just make it so you can only auto-gather all the resources if you fully eliminate all enemies in the zone, right? And have it if there's still enemies left and you finish the level, then you don't auto-gather the resources. It just seems like a strange step back. Normally in more modern games, they prioritize quality of life that makes the game simpler and easier. So it seems strange that they would take something out, which was a good mechanic to reduce the amount of time you spent in a level. Because in this game, I did spend quite a bit of time slowly gathering all the resources in the mission because I might need them later. Whereas I could have just jumped and saved a good 5 or 10 minutes. So that's definitely a strange thing to remove there. One quality of life they made over previous Homeworlds is that the resource collectors don't need to come back to the mothership to drop off resources. I think that's definitely a good improvement. It makes resource collectors more independent, I should say, in turn making it so they act like almost independent mining vessels, able to collect and harness resources on their own. Unfortunately, in the campaign, there are no enemy resource collectors at any point, so there's no options to try and cut off the enemy supply, cut off their resource collection, or fight over resources. Instead, the enemy just warps in infinite units, essentially, in the campaign, which is definitely disappointing. I quite like it in games where the enemy has actual bases where they produce unit from, where they have actual resource gathering, but there's none of that here. One of the things that this game does add that I don't think was in previous games, but I can't quite remember, is the idea that once capital ships like destroyers or battlecruisers are destroyed, they leave salvage, which can be gathered as a form of resource. These salvages need to be taken back to the mothership or a carrier, and so are more similar to the previous games. I do like the idea of this in the sense that losing larger ships can also be devastating because the enemy could gather the resources from them. As I said, unfortunately in the campaign there are no resource gatherers, so it's not something to worry about. But in multiplayer, it could be a main issue. It would also increase the value of actually eliminating those larger ships, as you can actually steal some of the resources used to create them. Overall, I would say this game is a passable take on the Homeworld franchise. It definitely has lost a few things, and I'm not sure why. I did hear that in the initial versions of the game it was quite badly balanced and very easy, but I think they've done some patches to improve the difficulty, shall we say, of the game. Capture ships just can't capture everything easily. Destroyers and battlecruisers are much tougher and harder to take down for both you and the enemy, maybe a little too much. Overall, this is the sort of game I would recommend to somebody who maybe hasn't played any of the older Homeworlds and isn't very good at, shall we say, going back and playing older and clunky games. I think this game is a good introduction for people who are maybe interested in getting to Homeworld, because you could easily play this game, master the mechanics, which are quite simple, and then go back and try other previous titles. I will also say this game is rather beautiful, so I think it really nails the graphical and art style setting of Homeworld. Unfortunately, a lot of the levels aren't really set in interesting environments, but some of them are truly beautiful to look at. For example, the first level, where we start above a Higaran planet, has a lot of detail put into it, which does make me want to believe that the developers truly cared about this game and wanted to make something good, and really respected the Homeworld franchise. Another minor addition this game made, which I'm not sure is even worth mentioning, is that some environments are traversable by smaller ships. For example, there's holes or destroyed parts of larger structures that these level takes place in, and your smaller strike craft can move through them to get around the enemy or flank them. Personally, I don't think this was a really important addition. It doesn't really change anything about the game other than letting a strike craft essentially get behind the enemy. They also seem to have added the idea of using terrain as cover. Your units can hide essentially behind pieces of structures or space rocks or the environment in general, in order to avoid enemy fire, which I do think is neat, but not really unique enough to really set this game apart. And it's a sort of mechanic you can easily ignore. I mean, I know I did in my playthrough. As I said, I'd say this is a passable take on the Homeworld mechanics, but nothing more than that. It doesn't really push the envelope either in a good or a bad way. It doesn't really add anything of note. It doesn't really change any of the mechanics in a major way. It does still feel like a step back in some ways. Maybe be more accurate to say this is kind of feels like Homeworld in stasis. This game could have easily not have been made and we'd be in the same place gameplay-wise than if it had. But maybe that's the best we can get. Maybe there's just no appetite for a modern Homeworld game. Now, let's move on to the places where I understand why this game has such negative reviews. And I kind of agree, shall we say, the story. I've sighed many times while talking about the story, even in these last few moments. Because let's just say, it's not very good. Well, let's start at the beginning. This game opens with your character, I suppose, the protagonist, Imogen Sajet, talking about how her mentor, Karen Sajet, who was the navigator and arguably protagonist of Homeworld 1 and 2, has gone missing, and that she has been called up to find her and investigate the anomaly, as it's called. I'm paraphrasing quite a bit here because she doesn't just do that. She talks a lot about how she's a genius and how she's going to reinvent Higaran society and how she's going to push things forward. And it's just not really that important or interesting. And it's not really a good idea, I think, to introduce a character by having them talk about how great they are. But maybe that's just me. Unfortunately, the first two levels are largely tutorials and don't really tell us much about the story or what's happening in the game. They do tell us one thing, though. Our primary mission is to investigate the anomaly because, for some reason, ships are coming out of the anomaly and killing billions of people for no real reason. And then the fleet says we'll be essentially on our own with no support and we're to practice radio silence, which seems rather strange to me. Shouldn't we be, taking on a large-scale expedition to the anomaly instead of essentially sending one ship with an untested navigator who has literally just been put in to a mothership? No? Okay, well, I guess it's just our ship, which doesn't even have a production model until the next mission. One thing that does happen of note is between the first few missions, we get these scenes where Imogen stands on an island and what seems to be a giant triangle talks to her. These are definitely weird scenes, but they set the, shall we say, standard for what else is going to happen in this game. Level 3 feels like our first actual mission. It's the first mission where we start off being able to produce troops, that being ships, and the first mission where we undergo dedicated attacks and actually have to take over territories and fight for resources. This level introduces us to the pirate faction, and oh wait, they're dead and gone after this. We never see them again in the campaign. Okay, moving on. At the end of this mission, the captain of your ship gives a speech to his troops about how they're on their own and they've got to save the galaxy and all of that. He does say one thing of note, though. At one point he says, this ship is driven by the best navigator of our generation. And then after his speech, Imogen asks, is that what he said true? And he kind of gently says, no, he was lying to the crew, which I find quite funny, and I'm not sure if the developers intended it to come off this way. Just insult her straight to her face, I guess. If he was going to lie to the crew, why didn't he just lie to her as well and say, yeah, ship is led by the best navigator of our generation. There's also the fact that I think she might be the only navigator of her generation, so I guess kind of she is the best by default. Here's where I'm going to call your spoiler warning. Honestly, this game's story isn't very good, so if you want to listen, feel free to. If not, skip to later in the video. It definitely would be hard to understand why I and others dislike this game so much unless you listen to the story though, so make your own choice, I guess. In the next mission, we go through a portal and immediately collide with another ship, in what is quite a good sequence, I think. One of the things this game does quite well is the idea of unit chatter, which is a rather consistent thing across the Homeworld franchise. It's definitely nice hearing your individual units talk and scream as they die, or cheer as they kill their enemies. This game is no exception. I think that's one of the better parts of this game is the unit chatter and command barks of your units, and they have quite a large cast of characters, so you won't often hear the same sort of phrases more than once. Or maybe I simply wasn't paying attention and they actually happen all the time, constantly. Could have happened. I wasn't paying that much attention. I did notice lots of different voice actors, though. This mission's largely about protecting the mothership while it repairs. And it does show us our primary enemy, the Incarnate. Other than that, though, this mission doesn't have anything of note except for the ending. This time, Imogen enters the dreamscape, but Karen's also here. Look how bored she is. The triangle again appears and tells us to find Karen. And that's it for this dream sequence. I'm not sure where this is supposed to be, because it doesn't really make sense that other people would be appearing if it's just Imogen's internal world or whatever. So is this supposed to be some sort of large-scale intergalactic meeting room that powerful navigators come to? I don't know. It's never explained. The next mission doesn't really have much of note other than the fact that at the end we capture an Incarnate soldier and he teaches us a little about their faction. There is one thing that, honestly, I'm going to kind of rant about. Your fleet leader, I'm not even sure he's supposed to be the captain. He's called Intel in game, but he seems to be arguably captaining the ship. He calls them the Incarnate deluded fanatics like the Gaussians. So I'm going to stop you right there. The Gaussians were kind of fanatical, yes, but they were right. Their fanaticism was based on reality. They believed that going into space would lead to the destruction of Karak, and they were 100% right. Sure, they were fanatics, but they were correct. They weren't delusional. They were 100% right. I just find it hard to believe that in this world, the Gaussians would be looked down upon and seen as fanatics, whereas in reality, they should really be seen as a cautionary tale. People who were right, but were unable to get the message across in such a way that people believed them, or maybe a correct belief that over hundreds of thousands of years transformed into a religious belief. I really don't think they would be looked down on. I think they'd be seen more as unfortunate figures who, in the end, turned out to be right. Rant over. Maybe. It just feels like maybe the developers of this game, or whoever wrote the story, didn't actually play Homeworld Deserts of Karak or even Homeworld 1. Because anyone who has played those games knows the Gaussians were right. You know, they weren't just fanatics, they were correct. Their beliefs were based on essentially the truth. All right, I'll stop now. But come on now, this just seems so strange. Like, it doesn't seem right that you would even say this. Anyone would say this in the setting. Like, if I was a Gagarin and I heard someone say this, I'd be like, oh, well, hang on. You know, they were right, you know. They might have been fanatical, but they were right. We should really respect that. Okay, I'm going to stop talking about this now. The next level is largely forgettable. We simply fly through an asteroid field, hang behind rocks, and then we get through the asteroid field and it's over. One of the things that is revealed, though, is the Incarnate intentionally blew up a planet in order to put these asteroids here to stop us. I'm not sure why they're trying to stop us, though, or how they knew where we were going to be, to the point where they would destroy a planet to put it in our way, when they could have just stood in our way with fleets, you know? Like, why send a planet to do the job? Why destroy a planet, just have it block the way, when they could have just put their fleet here? Just seems strange if they knew we were going to be here. This next mission is kind of where I reach, okay, what levels? They're trying to access a repair facility so they can repair the damage done to the mothership, and all of the codes they're using aren't working. So Imogen starts singing a lullaby that Karen told her, and it just suddenly works. This just seems idiotic, to give it a more honest word. Would you really encrypt secret files behind a lullaby you sang to a child potentially like 20 years ago? I know I wouldn't. I know I don't remember any lullabies that were told to me as a child. Only thing I remember are command barks from strategy games. This level is actually one of the hardest ones in the game, at least for me. It's the only level where I actually died, because you essentially have to hold off wave after wave of enemy ships, and there's a lot of destroyers, at least on hard, and you don't really have anything that can effectively deal with them. So I did win this mission in the end, still on hard, but lost nearly my entire fleet. Oh boy. It was a challenge though, and I enjoyed that, so thumbs up for that, I guess. When we finish the level this time, we go back to the dreamscape, and oh boy, a giant head. In this section, the incarnate queen, as she comes to be known, tells us a little about her ideology and why she's doing all this. And honestly, it doesn't make a lot of sense. She says that she's a navigator, essentially, and she believes the only way to create other navigators is through killing billions of people, and one will be born. Her argument is that Karen became a navigator because Karak burned, but there's a problem with that, because Karen became a navigator before Karak burned. That was kind of the whole point. She was made into a navigator, the Higarans left Karak, and that's why Karak burned. So the Queen's ideology just doesn't have any basis in reality, it feels like. Again, it feels like whoever wrote this didn't play Homeworld 1. Because as I said, Karen was placed into the mothership before Karak was destroyed. They left the planet, and then the planet was destroyed. So the idea that she became a navigator due to the destruction of Karak just seems wrong, just incorrect. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm remembering Homeworld wrong, but I'm pretty sure she was a navigator before Karak was destroyed. And either way, she says Imogen was also turned into a navigator because of her destruction, and that's not really true. The Higarans were clearly already planning to create more navigators, and Imogen was essentially just forced into the position because of the destruction, which I suppose makes the Queen kind of right, but only a little. In the intro, Imogen talks about how she was preparing to train another generation of navigators. So ironically, if the Queen had done nothing, a bunch of navigators would have just been created, because that's what the Higarans were intending to do. And even if the Queen was right, okay, destroying billions of people in order to create one navigator doesn't feel like a fair trade. Because, I mean, what do navigators do? They fly ships. That's all they do. They steer them, they go through hyperspace with them. They're not that important. And navigators need these protogenitor cores to do anything anyway. But oh well, I guess. Let's continue. Level 8 is so short, I didn't even realize it was a level until I checked my files and was like, where's my level 8 recording? And I had to actually look at the game and see, oh, that 10-minute section was level 8. Okay. So we somehow just find the enemy's primary construction facilities, and we fly in a few ships disguised as incarnate ships and destroy their structure bases, I guess. And that's level 8, really quick and really simple. Barely even exists as a level, might as well have not been a level. When I first played it, I thought it was just the intro to that level. This level doesn't have much of note. We essentially just go around clearing up the incarnates production and units, and then it's over. The main thing of note about this level is at the end, the Imogen and the captain of the ship argue over what their primary objective is. Imogen wants to go find Karen. The commander wants to actually kill the incarnate and defeat them, and she wins the argument, and so they go in search of Karen. In the next mission, we get a short intro where the incarnate queen rants at Imogen about how she's refusing to become what she's supposed to be and other things. She also sees the destruction of her military base and the death of the military commander in charge there. Imogen ironically does apologize, and the queen just tries to pretend that she doesn't actually care, but clearly she does. It seems like a very childish interaction, which I'm not sure if that's what the developers are intending, to try and make the incarnate queen seem rather childish, because that's how she comes across to me. Anyway, this level is your mandatory stealth level in a strategy game, which we always end up having and are usually not that good. Ironically, this one's okay because the only thing you need to keep stealthed is the mothership. The rest of your fleet can freely fly around and kill everything. Nothing really of note happens in this level, honestly. But when we finish it, we fly through some weird ice cave, and then we find Karen's mothership, the Car Sejuk, in what is a quite good scene, I think. This sort of scene is what I would have liked to see more of in this game, as it feels very homeworldy. This next level is pretty simple. You simply just defend the Car Sejuk from the enemy attacks. and then you win. Definitely a lot easier than the last defense mission, since we now have torpedo turrets and ships which can deal with capital class enemy vessels much easier. After that, we get this cutscene of Karen and Imogen meeting. Yes, and Karen was alive despite being entombed in ice for like 20 years. Anyway, they talk and come up with some sort of plan, I think, on how they're going to defeat the Incarnate Queen. They don't really elaborate for us, the viewer. Karen, ironically, seems very sympathetic towards the Incarnate Queen, which feels really strange. There's no real reason for her to sympathize with her. The Incarnate Queen has killed billions of people, you know? So, and since Karen experienced the destruction of Karak, you would think she'd be more extreme in her dislike of her. Since she is someone who's had her home destroyed, she should appreciate the damage that comes from the destruction of your homeworld and the death of everyone on it. So seeing her be sympathetic to the Incarnate Queen seems very strange and out of character for her. Karen's the sort of character who could have easily been radicalized due to the destruction of Karak. But alas. Imogen actually takes over the Carsaduke, so now we essentially have 2 motherships. Oh boy. In level 12, we show up at the Incarnate Queen's base, and Imogen asks to negotiate. The Incarnate Queen ignores her and essentially just attacks, which wasn't that surprising. Although I'm not sure why the Incarnate Queen has been attacking us this whole time. She's quite clear that she wants Imogen to join her, so why has every step of the way she been attacking us? She also wanted Imogen to find Karen, so again, why every step of the way has she been blocking us? It's a part where the story and the gameplay don't really match up, because there's no reason for her to really want to stop us, because she wants us to come there and find Karen. It just doesn't make sense. But that's not the first or last thing that doesn't make sense in this game's story. Anyway, we simply defeat the enemy fleet that's been sent to stop us, and we move on to the next level. Imogen pretends to submit to the Incarnate Queen so that she can get close to her. Then, of course, we immediately betray her and attack once we get close enough to the Incarnate Queen's main base. This level is quite simple. We simply have to bring the Carsaduke to 3 points on the large vessel. I'm not sure what it's called, a capital ship thing. I don't know. And then we defeat the enemy mothership, essentially, and the level ends. In the ending of this level, there's quite a funny sequence where the Incarnate Queen is ranting and raving while Imogen and Karen have a conversation, and you can hear her in the background screaming, which again, I feel like they were intending to make her seem more childish. I'm still not sure though, because she definitely feels like kind of like a child lashing out in this scene. Then Karen, Imogen, and the Incarnate Queen all meet in the Mind verse, and Karen says she's gonna die together with the Incarnate Queen, and then they fly away. Also, the Incarnate Queen's base also just hyperspaces away. I don't know where or why. And that's the end of the game. We get a scene with Imogen lounging around in her own mind space with a virtual Karen who's there to sing her lullaby that's so important to her, and the game's over. Okay, so this was not a very good story, I don't think. I would actually say it's quite bad, maybe even terrible, depending on how big of a fan of Homeworld you are, and this game has kind of just disrespected the story and plot of Homeworld, I think, at least a little. One of the things I want to mention that I feel like maybe has not been talked about is the fact that the Homeworld franchise has never really focused on characters. That's the thing. Karen Sajet kind of was the protagonist of Homeworld 1 and 2, but it didn't really feel like she was the protagonist. It more felt like the crew of the ships were the protagonists. The ships, arguably, were the protagonists of Homeworld. They never really focused on these characters and this character drama. They focused on the ships themselves and their path, essentially, through space and the conflicts they were in. So I think the focus on characters just at the start is a major downside and major move away from what Homeworld's normally about. So even if the story was good, it would still feel like an unnatural departure from the normal Homeworld style. And the story's not good. It's bad. It doesn't make a lot of sense. It doesn't make a lot of sense even within its own lore, let alone the Homeworld lore. Like, why is the Incarnate Queen doing this? Why does it matter? Why did she really just need a friend, like Karen said? Like, it just seems so stupid. I understand they tried to make the Incarnate Queen sympathetic, but why would you sympathize with her? She's killing billions of people in order to create navigators when we know that navigators can just be created by anybody, anywhere. It seems her just entire ideology is wrong, and the whole point of her trying to get Imogen to join her doesn't make any sense either, because she doesn't really have anything to offer Imogen. She's just the enemy. She wants to kill Karen as well, so there's no reason for Imogen to join her. Maybe if she'd had Karen hostage the whole game, it would have made more sense, her trying to get Imogen to submit, because she'd actually have something to offer her. But there's no reason for Imogen to side with the Incarnate Queen, like, at all. Even if Imogen did want to dominate the galaxy, it would arguably make more sense to defeat the Incarnate Queen and take her place than it would be to side with her. Honestly, I think the Incarnate Queen is a terrible character, and I think a lot of the bad things about this game are based around her. I think it might have been better if she didn't exist, and instead Karen was the Incarnate Queen. I'm not sure it would be that much better, but it would be a lot more understandable if Karen was the Incarnate Queen, her trying to get Imogen to join her, Imogen feeling conflicted about joining her. A lot of it would make sense if Karen was the Incarnate Queen. I know it's very cliche to just take a character and have them turn evil for whatever reason, but I think it would have been better if it had been done like that. You could have Karen just get corrupted by some evil energy at the center of the anomaly or something stupid like that. I just think that would have been better. You could even have the current Incarnate Queen exist as maybe a rebel who's fighting with the Incarnate Queen, that being Karen, and having her sacrifice herself to kill Karen. So you basically just have the same story but switch two of the characters around, and I think it would be a definite improvement. But alas, this story is not very good. And unfortunately, I think it may have deeper consequences on the Homeworld franchise. Will we ever see Homeworld 4? Who can say? Now let's move on, and I'll talk about the positives of this game, the things that I did enjoy. The levels in the campaign are quite varied, despite how short the campaign is. You never really do the same thing more than once. There were no levels that I think were horrible or tedious. There were some that were very short, and there were barely levels, like the one with the asteroids. But overall, it was a good campaign. It was enjoyable to play through, engaging at least. Problem is, of course, the stories. This game is very beautiful. It's very nice to look at. Not just the skyboxes, but the ships and their designs are all great. It really does feel like the graphical designers had a lot of love for the game and the setting and put the work in to really show that. As I said earlier in the video, I think the gameplay itself is passable. If you've never played a Homeworld game, I actually think it'd be a good place to start if you were interested in going back and playing the old Homeworld games, but maybe you're a little resistant to the jankiness of those older titles and wanted a easier pool to dip your toe into, I suppose. The soundtrack in this game, I'd say, is a step back from the previous Homeworlds, but it's fine for what it is. It's not bad. It's just not as good, I think. Which is how I describe this game. It's okay. It's just not as good as its predecessors. For the negatives, I mean, the story is the major negative. It's just not very good, like at all. It's actively bad. I have no desire to play it again or even think about it. In fact, thinking about it kind of upsets me. Outside of that, the campaign itself is too short for what it is. It's essentially like 9 missions. The first 2 are tutorials and so don't count. There's one mission that's only 5 minutes, so it doesn't count. So if you take those missions out, is, as I said, 9 minutes with not a lot going on. It definitely feels like the campaign should have been longer. I honestly wouldn't have minded if they just took out all of the cutscenes in this game and replaced them with more gameplay and extended the length of the campaign, because the story's not very good, so I don't want to hear the cutscenes, but the gameplay is rather enjoyable, so I want more of it, but there isn't any more of it. I don't want to talk too much about the story, but I said it's the major negative for this game. I've already talked about it enough, but that's what drags this game down. If there was no story and just the gameplay, I think a lot of people would have a more tolerance for the game, because the base gameplay is okay. It's definitely an alright modern take on the Homeworld formula, although I think it could be improved. To round everything up, do I recommend this game? Not really. As I said, if you're new to the Homeworld franchise and are interested in getting into it and you don't really care about this game's story, I think this is a good starting point. Play this game and then go back and play the older Homeworlds. But if you're a fan of the Homeworld franchise, I think the bigger fan you are, the worse this game will be for you. I'm not a massive fan of the Homeworld franchise, not because I dislike it, just because I'm not that into it. But having played all the games, other than this one, I really disliked this game's story and plot. It damaged me mentally, as I've said. So the more of a fan you are, as I said, the less I recommend this game. If you're a very loose fan, even then, it might still do damage to you. And considering the price, that being £50 British, I definitely can't recommend this game for that price. I wouldn't even recommend this game for half that price, or even half of that. This is a game that feels like it should be £5 max, not 50. There simply isn't enough content to justify it being £50. The stories are rather short experience. Then you just have skirmish multiplayer in the War Games mode. But the War Games mode is very short as well, only 3 missions. And unless you have a dedicated group of friends to play this game with multiplayer, I just don't see where you'd get the hours in for it to be worth that amount of money. I will say that currently in March, the Homeworld 3 is available in the Humble Bundle choice, which means you can get it and like 7 other games for around £9 or around $12, I think, just off the top of my head. There are all sorts of discounts and coupons going around, so the price might be less for some people. But that sort of price, together with another 7 games, is how I'd recommend this game. It's definitely not worth that price on its own, even so little. Honestly, I would describe this game as a forgettable experience that I would hopefully forget. And I worry the amount of damage this game will have done to the Homeworld franchise. I hope we do eventually get a Homeworld 4. And if we do get a Homeworld 4, I hope it focuses on someone else other than Suggets. I don't care about Suggets. Give me a Soban campaign. Hell, give me a game about the Sontal fighting a giant space worm or some other beast-like entity. I'd be fine with that. Just no more Suggets. I don't care about them. They're not interesting. And this game has made me even less interested in them than I was before. This is the end of the video. Thank you for watching. If you couldn't tell, I didn't enjoy playing this game or talking about it. Both were exercises in frustration, I suppose. I had to really hold myself back from ranting too much about the game's story, but I still did anyway. But let's move on. For my next video, I was actually planning to do something a little different, to make a mod review. Woo! So be excited for that. It won't be for a game I've reviewed so far. I won't even bother giving hints because you'll never guess, but we'll see how it goes. Maybe I'll make more mod reviews in the future if I enjoy it. But next month, I actually checked my list, and it's nearly all space games, so you can have that to look forward to. Some of them are even Homeworld-like. One of them even is the Russian version of Homeworld, so you have that to look forward to, I guess. Anyway, thank you for watching. See you in the next video.